Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another new entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions. This one following a theme that's a favorite of a lot of people out there involving the long lost world of dragons. Those of you that have followed my channel for quite some time know that I've sprinkled dragon-like videos here and there, especially at the very beginning of one of my quests here on these Cryptids and Monsters video. It's always a fascinating subject because I love the idea that a mythical creature such as this, something like straight out of J.R.R. Tolkien's type world, could really be out there in this world. One of my favorite videos I've done was the wild dragon, the one that supposedly is buried deep within, or the bones are at least, deep within a mountainside. I'll include the link for it below in case you haven't seen that video. It's again one of my favorites. But this one has to do with a dragon that was apparently encountered just once, but still, it was pretty memorable enough, and it was here in the United States. In fact, it was early on during the settler days. In fact, you're looking at a representation of it now. It goes by pretty much two names, but the more common name is the Cumberland Dragon. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating information associated with this very unique creature, even though, again, there was just one instance associated with it. Who knows? It could still be hibernating out there to this very day, looking to make another appearance sometime soon. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the interesting information associated with it. So what is this Cumberland Dragon? Well, it also goes by a different name, a weirder name of sorts. It's known as Goosefoot. More on that here in a minute as to why, but the idea again that it's called a Cumberland Dragon definitely sounds much more interesting. This was a dragon that was apparently encountered sometime in 1794, although what's interesting is that when it was reported was December 4th, 1794, and it was reported in a periodical, I guess you could call it that, called the Caledonian Mercury back on December 4th, 1794. But that doesn't mean that that's the date that it occurred. Obviously, it must have occurred earlier in the year. And then, of course, considering that this was the 1700s and you know how much time took travel-wise when it came to news spreading from one place to another, you could just imagine that this was much earlier in the year. But yes, this dragon was encountered by an expedition team. First, let's talk about its physical characteristics. And there's not much really to report, unfortunately, but some of the stuff still stands out. For starters, this was a creature that was smaller than most dragons are perceived to be. You know how you see those movies? They always showcase dragons almost the size of kaiju, like you have something massively large, essentially dwarfing any human being. Here, though, this particular dragon was about 4 feet at its highest height, basically. I don't know exactly if this meant that this was a junior dragon of sorts. Maybe it was a baby dragon. In other words, it still had a lot more years tied to it. Either way, though, at least at 4 feet high, it was definitely more manageable when it came to its scare factor. Otherwise, if this would have been something like the size of Smaug, then obviously that would have been a whole different story. It had 2 legs. It had an almost upright stance, so it could almost walk basically as a bipedal creature of sorts. It had scales that were considered blackish and then also brown, and then there was a light yellow colorish, almost like rings, sprinkled throughout parts of its body, and then on the top of its head there was a white tuft or slash crown, and it looks like it was just a natural part of its body. Like, in other words, it wasn't wearing a crown like you would imagine a king wears a crown. No, instead it looks like it had some kind of natural appendage that makes it look like it had a crown. But obviously it would have been quite a sight. Having something like this instantly would have made it seem far more regal. And then lastly, what the last thing that people saw on it was its large red eyes. In fact, they were considered fiery red when it was discovered by the group that basically was doing this expedition. This expedition was led by a guy by the name of Captain John Beard. He had been going to an area called the Cumberland Mountains. These are located near the Appalachian Mountains here in the U.S., hence the name the Cumberland Dragon. That's why it's pretty much stuck as that way. And then specifically, specifically in an area called Cover Creek. That's when they ran into it. In fact, as they were advancing to another part of that location, that's when one of the nearby spies for them discovered it, and it was really close. Apparently, the way I read it, they must have just accidentally caught it off guard because this creature was very close to them. It was 3 steps from them. So you can imagine it's only a few feet away from their location. And then it reared itself up. When it did so in a daring posture, almost like in the sense that it knew that it was suddenly almost cornered by this small expedition group, and then others were ready to do something in terms of shooting or having some kind of gunplay associated with this type of stuff. But the problem, though, was the expedition knew if they did this, they were going to run into Indians. And so what happened was, orders were given not to do any shooting again to make sure that no attention was drawn from any of the Native Americans around that location. There was an ensign there within the group, a guy by the name of Ensign McDonald, who was actually pretty brave, it seems like, because he had a sword with him, and it seems like he was the closest one to the dragon itself. And so he used this sword to strike against the dragon. Can you believe that? Imagine running into something like this that looks, again, straight out of some kind of token type world, and yet here he is striking at it with a sword. This caused this beast to jump up straight into the air 8 feet high, which of course made them move back, because here you have something almost so effortlessly be able to do such a very large jump. But as it did so, they noticed that something came out of its mouth that resembled blood. In fact, it was more along the lines of like blood, but it was almost like thicker, and it was some kind of reddish type matter. I don't know if this was something that was considered dangerous or maybe even fiery like, but as it turns out, this creature then started turning around and around, almost as if it was going to fight them. They saw that it was making these tracks on the ground, and as they did so, the footprints absolutely looked like those of a goose, like the footprints that a goose makes, but instead obviously being a much larger creature. That's why also it's known as the goose foot. As I mentioned earlier, very unique name, but that's essentially why this creature was called this other nickname. And so as it turns out, this creature instead just decided to move about and then went into another area. And as it did so, then that was it. There was no other encounter with it. It must have moved pretty quickly, because either the mountains there had a lot of perfect hiding spots, or again, it just moved so fast that by the time they started going after it, it was too far up in the horizon and then it was gone. I don't know if it was flying away to another location or if it was just sprinting, like running, in other words, on the ground itself. Remember, it was a bipedal creature. But as it turns out, there was a little bit more of a research that was done by some of the people there. I guess they were from the expedition themselves. They were there working with, or I guess running into, some of those same Indians, the Native Americans that I was mentioning earlier, that they were wary of. Those Indians stated that this creature did indeed inhabit that part of the mountain, and its breath, whatever that thing was, again, that was coming out from its mouth that resembled a bloodish, reddish hue of some sort, can indeed be deadly. It will kill a man as long as the man is in turn not able to douse themselves in water. It almost made it seem like this was something along the lines of, I'm guessing more along the lines of an acidic thing. Like, in other words, it's almost fiery, but it's not burning. Like, it's more of, hey, this is something that, again, could create serious harm if you don't douse yourself with types of water. And so the Native Americans were, again, able to give more of a little bit detail associated with this creature. But that was pretty much it. There was no other encounter associated with either that group or anyone else around that area after 1794. Of course, America grew and a lot of people moved into that location, cut to today, and you have that Cumberland region. Still, nobody has seen anything associated with this dragon. This crew, whatever it was that was led by Captain John Beard there over at Cove Creek at Cumberland Mountain, they were pretty much the only ones that happened to run into it, and then that was it. But if anybody has any more information, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. What about those of you there within the Appalachian area, the Cumberland region, maybe in the Cove Creek area, maybe those of you that know more history associated with this very, very unique circumstance, then please post those comments below. I find it also interesting that this was reported in the closest thing there to a newsletter, because that just adds, at least in my opinion, more credence when it comes to this type of activity. Obviously, there's the idea too that this is, could be sensationalism. It's done to sell newspapers, especially when there's very little back then, or even in some cases now, to be able to verify these kind of things. But still, having something like this, at least encountered once, makes me wonder if it's still somewhere out there. Maybe it went into hibernation. Maybe the right type of development will awaken it afterwards. Who knows? But if that happens, we may see this Cumberland Dragon just one more time. Again, I love the idea that there could be real-life dragons out there within this world. But again, anyone have any information, then please post those comments below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.